We're joined now by Craig Gilbert, our Washington Bureau Chief, who's in the studio today rather than by Skype. And Craig, we wanted to just sort of set the table here for our discussion today about Scott Walker and how he's doing. So let's start with some of the fundamentals. Despite all the problems he has out there, he's got a fair amount of money. Only one debate is in the books. There's more to come. And none of the other candidates, aside from Donald Trump, is doing all that great. So should Scott Walker be worried? How do you think he's feeling right now in terms of how he's doing?
Well, they've got, you know, they're concerned. I mean, they're going through a bumpy stretch in the campaign. I think they do take heart in what you call the fundamentals, which is that he does have a record that's kind of unique. He does have a kind of a niche in the race. The same things that kind of propelled him back in January about his background and his political story are still there. And most fundamentally, I mean, this is a race in which nobody is in the driver's seat. I mean, Donald Trump is the polling front runner, but if you don't think he can win the nomination, a lot of people don't, the rest of the field is absolutely fractured. And so it's wide open. So it's there for the taking, for somebody to take it. And Scott Walker, you know, probably looks around at the rest of the field, at the other kind of more establishment candidates, and thinks, well, I've got as good a shot as any of them.
Yeah, so I mean, strategically, if you've got Trump out there, and if you don't think that he's going to be the one to last and win, do you go after the other Republican candidates? Do you go after Trump to bring him down, or what is?
Well, I think they made the decision early on that not to get into a fight with Trump. It didn't really make sense for them. We're seeing Jeb Bush do more of that, but he's got his own reasons for doing that. Trump kind of called Jeb Bush out, called him a low-energy candidate, taunted him. Jeb Bush is an establishment candidate, and I think his supporters expect him to take on Trump. I think, you know, he's got who's his competition in the race? Well, it's still to some degree Jeb Bush. It's still to some degree Marco Rubio, because Marco Rubio also has the ability to kind of appeal to different branches of the party. You know, maybe John Kasich to some degree, who's another Midwestern governor, even though their political themes and messages in this campaign are different. But I think they made the judgment early on that there was no real benefit to them to getting into a big fight with Donald Trump, especially since he's still trying to appeal to some of those Trump voters.
Right, and so we're being in Wisconsin, we see the Walker headlines and things a lot more than the other candidates. But if we were living in Kentucky, is Rand Paul getting a lot of bad headlines, or Florida, Marco Rubio? How are these other guys faring? Are they struggling like Walker is, or they're just not catching fire? Or what are you?
Well, I think it's the arc is different. I mean, the thing that one reason Scott Walker has been getting so much attention is that he soared early in this race, and there was really a widespread view in the political world nationally that he was in the top tier of 2 or 3 candidates for many months, and so he gained all this stature and visibility in the race, and then he encountered problems. He had kind of an underwhelming first debate. He's had these so-called unforced errors on the campaign trail. So that makes for a pretty compelling story if you're a political journalist, is that arc, the up and the down. Some of these other candidates, you know, Rand Paul has had trouble getting traction all along. He's really floundered throughout this race, and he's certainly getting less national media attention because he's not seen as much of a contender.
Yeah, so speaking of these sort of unforced errors, the biggest thing that was in the headlines this week was this wall with Canada, and the governor says, well, he didn't really answer that question. He was answering a different question. Is that an unforced error or a misinterpretation by the people who saw his response?
Well, I think it was, in some respects, it was kind of random. It was almost offhand. He got this question about the northern border. He didn't come right out and say, I want to build a wall on the northern border, but he seemed to be taking the idea seriously. I think it wasn't kind of an offhand comment, but it also kind of fits a pattern, right? I mean, immigration is the one issue that's just stymied him and flummoxed him throughout this campaign, where he's had acknowledged changes in his position. He's gotten hung up, the birthright citizenship issues that he's not used to discussing, and he's not as well versed in, where he seems kind of hesitant, and his positions, you know, he talks about them in ways that are ambiguous and lend themselves to different interpretations. So there is a pattern there that he has to clean up.
All right, so looking ahead, in about 2 weeks we'll have the next Republican debate, another big, you know, stage opportunity. What do you think the governor needs to be working on, or is aiming for, you know, for that?
Well, they probably aimed too low in the first debate, which was to sort of just not screw up, and he didn't screw up. And in a way, his performance was underwhelming enough that it ended up hurting him. I think he knows, and they know, that he has to bring a greater sense of urgency to this debate, that he has to maximize his time on stage in a way that he didn't in Cleveland, and he really has to talk about his record in a forceful way. I mean, these are debates, the time is so precious, even more so in this debate, because you're going to have 11 people on stage probably instead of 10. He's got to get the most out of every second on stage.
All right, well, thank you very much. We'll have some more discussion on Governor Walker coming up.